He boarded the cruise ship alone, a quiet man looking for peace on the open sea. For 7 days, the ocean carried more than 1,000 souls across calm waters. But on the 5th night, one passenger vanished without a trace. No splash, no witness, no sign of struggle. Only a cabin door left slightly open and a single shoe found on the deck. This is the story of Daniel Reeves, the man who vanished from a cruise ship and was never found. The airport was alive with noise and movement. It was Christmas Eve in 1971. People hurried through the terminal holding gifts and flowers. Children laughed. Loudspeakers echoed with flight announcements. The smell of coffee and jet fuel filled the air. Juliane stood with her mother at the check-in counter. She was 17 years old. She carried a small brown bag with books and a stuffed toy. Her mother looked tired but excited. They were flying to Pucallpa to join Juliane's father for the holidays. He worked deep in the Peruvian rainforest. As a biologist, Juliane had grown up there surrounded by animals and trees. She missed the sounds of the jungle. She missed the quiet of the river. Their flight was delayed because of bad weather. A tropical storm was moving in from the mountains. Passengers worried. Some wanted to cancel. But when the announcement came that Flight 508 was boarding, everyone hurried to the gate. It was Christmas Eve. No one wanted to wait another day. The airplane sat on the runway surrounded by mist. It was a Lockheed L-188. Electra 4 engines hummed as crew members loaded baggage. The wings gleamed in the dull light. The captain stood near the stairs, shaking hands with passengers. He smiled. He said the weather was rough but manageable, Juliane. And her mother climbed the steps and entered the cabin. The air inside was warm and thick. A flight attendant guided them to their seats near the back. Juliane took the window seat. Her mother sat beside her. People were talking softly. A man in a business suit checked his watch. A little boy played with a toy car on his tray table. A woman crossed herself and whispered a prayer. The engines began to grow louder. The plane rolled forward. Rain hit the windows like silver needles. The sky was turning gray. Juliane looked outside and saw the jungle stretching to the horizon. It looked endless. It looked peaceful. The plane lifted off. Passengers clapped quietly. The city below became a patch of lights. Clouds surrounded them like smoke. Juliane felt her ears pop. Her mother smiled and handed her a piece of candy. She said it would help. Juliane laughed softly. She loved flying. It felt safe. It felt like freedom. An hour passed. The cabin lights dimmed. Flight attendants served sandwiches and coffee. People relaxed. Some fell asleep. The turbulence began as a light shake. The seatbelt sign flashed. The captain's voice came over the speaker. He said they would pass through a small storm. Nothing to worry about. Juliane looked out the window. She saw flashes of lightning in the distance. The clouds were turning darker. She felt her stomach twist. Her mother put a hand on her arm and said it would be fine. The plane shook harder. Cups rattled on trays. The engines roared louder. A baby began to cry. The flight attendants moved quickly down the aisle. They checked seatbelts. Their faces looked calm, but their eyes showed worry. The captain spoke again. He said to stay seated. The turbulence would end soon. But it did not. The storm grew stronger. Thunder cracked around them. Lightning flashed so bright that people covered their eyes. Rain pounded the fuselage. The plane climbed higher, but the clouds swallowed it whole. The wings shuddered, the lights flickered. A smell of ozone filled the air. Juliane gripped her seat. Her mother whispered something, but the noise drowned her voice. The plane tilted left, then right. It felt like the sky was pulling it apart. Luggage compartments burst open. Bags fell into the aisle. Someone screamed. The overhead. Lights went out. The cabin glowed only from the lightning outside. Juliane looked out the window again. She saw fire. A bright orange light covered the wing. Flames danced across the metal. She felt heat against her face. People were shouting. The plane lurched downward. The sound of tearing metal filled the air. Her mother shouted her name. Then the cabin exploded with noise and wind. The roof tore away. Seats were ripped from the floor. The world turned white. Juliane felt herself lifted from her seat. The safety belt still held her to the chair. Cold air struck her face. She was spinning through the sky. Pieces of metal flashed past her. She saw the green jungle below, rushing toward her. Her mind went blank. For a moment she thought she had died. Then everything became black. There was no sound, no air, no feeling. Hours might have passed, or seconds. When Juliane opened her eyes, she was lying under a canopy of green leaves. Rain was falling on her face. The air smelled of earth and smoke. She could hear distant thunderbirds called in the distance. Her arm hurt, her leg throbbed. She was still strapped to her seat. The seat was half buried in the mud. She touched her head and felt blood. Her glasses were gone, her shoes were missing, her dress was torn, but she was alive. Juliane tried to sit up. Pain shot through her shoulder. She looked around. The jungle was silent except for rain. The trees were tall and heavy with vines. Steam rose from the ground. She called for her mother. Her voice was weak. There was no answer. She called again. Only birds answered. She was alone. Juliane closed her eyes. She tried to remember what had happened. The storm, the explosion, the fall. She remembered the fire on the wing, her mother's hand reaching for her, then nothing. She looked up at the sky through the trees. The clouds were breaking. Sunlight touched the leaves. She realized she had fallen from the sky and survived. She should have been dead, but she was not. She whispered a small prayer. She was scared. But she was alive. Juliane sat still. The rain fell harder. Her skin was covered in mud. Her hair was tangled with leaves. She looked at her arm. It was swollen and bruised. Her right collarbone hurt every time she breathed. She touched her face and felt dried blood. But she could move. She could feel her legs. She was alive. The jungle surrounded her in every direction. Thick vines hung from the trees. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. She could not see the sky. The trees were so tall. That light barely reached the ground. Her seat lay tilted on one side. Pieces of metal were scattered nearby. Part of a wing, a torn suitcase, a shoe. It was all that remained of the plane. She called out again. Her voice was weak. She shouted for her. Mother! She shouted for anyone, but there was only the sound of rain. Then came a strange noise. It was the slow drip of water from the leaves, the hum of insects, the cry of a distant bird. Life continued around her, as if nothing had happened. She tried to stand. Her body shook. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself up. The ground felt soft and uneven. She held onto a tree trunk and waited for the dizziness to fade. She turned slowly and looked around. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, endless green. Juliane took a deep breath. Her father had taught her about the jungle. He had told her that the forest was both beautiful and deadly. He said rivers always led to people. She tried to remember his words. Find a stream, follow it downstream. Never eat strange plants. Stay calm. Stay moving. She found her seatbelt tangled around her leg. She tore it free. Her head spun again. She fell to her knees. The pain in her shoulder burned. Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to sleep, but fear kept her awake. She knew she had to move before darkness came. The afternoon light faded quickly. The sky turned gray again. She searched through the wreckage. She found half a bag of candy. She slipped it into her pocket. She found a piece of metal that looked sharp enough to use as a knife. There was nothing else. No food, no shoes, no water bottle. Her seat was lying near a small ditch. She looked for footprints but found none. She realized she was alone. She called for her mother again. Her voice echoed weakly through the trees. No answer. She waited. She hoped. She prayed. Then the jungle went quiet. Night fell fast. Darkness came like a curtain. The sounds of the forest grew louder. Insects screamed, frogs croaked near the water, wings fluttered above. She felt something crawl across her arm. She brushed it away. Her body trembled. She felt cold even though the air was warm. Juliane lay back against her seat. She wrapped her arms around herself. She could still hear the rain. Each drop echoed in her ears. She tried not to cry. Her mind replayed the explosion, her mother's voice, the fall, the green blur below. She had fallen from the sky. It made no sense. No one could survive that. Yet here she was. She looked up through the trees. She could see tiny patches of stars. She whispered that she would find her mother. She whispered that she would not die here. Then her eyes closed. Sleep came in waves. It was shallow, restless, filled with flashes of fire and wind. Sometime during the night she woke to a strange sound. Something moved in the darkness nearby. Leaves shifted. Twigs snapped. She froze. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest. She listened. The sound moved again. Then it stopped. She could see nothing. Only shadows. She told herself it was an animal. Maybe a small one. She stayed still until her heartbeat slowed. The night felt endless. Mosquitoes bit her arms and face. She scratched until her skin burned. She whispered that morning would come. It had to come. At last, she saw light. Soft gray light filtered through the trees. The jungle came alive again with birdsong. The storm had passed. Steam rose from the ground. Her body was sore. Her mouth was dry. She sat up slowly. She looked around and saw something she had not noticed before. A faint trail through the leaves, broken branches, pieces of fabric. It led deeper into the jungle. She stood on shaky legs. Her bare feet sank into the mud. She began to follow the trail. Each step hurt. The ground was covered in roots and thorns, but she walked anyway. She had to know what was ahead. A few meters away, she found part of a wing, the pie. Metal was burned. A small fire still smoked near it. She saw more pieces of wreckage scattered in the trees. It looked like the plane had exploded in midair. Bodies were nowhere to be seen. She wanted to believe her mother was alive. She wanted to believe someone else had survived. But there was only silence. She searched for hours. She found nothing but twisted metal and bits of fabric. When the sun was high, she sat near a fallen log and rested. She ate one piece of candy and saved the rest. Her stomach growled, her throat burned with thirst. She looked at the candy and decided to keep it for later. Her father always said the jungle could kill with patience. She would need to be patient too. Juliane stood again. The forest floor was hot now. The smell of decay filled the air. Flies buzzed around the wreckage. She turned away and began to walk toward the sound of running water. It was faint, but steady. River, if she could reach it, she could follow it downstream. She knew rivers led to people. The sound grew louder as she walked. Her legs ached, her shoulder throbbed, her head felt heavy. Branches scratched her arms. She stumbled over roots and stones. She wanted to stop, but she did not. When she finally reached the water, she fell to her knees. It was a narrow stream, clear and cool. She cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted like life. She splashed her face and felt stronger. She whispered, "Thank you." She decided to stay near the stream for the night. It was safer. The sound of water gave her courage. As the sun began to fade, she built a small bed of leaves near a large tree. She used her seat cushion as a pillow. The jungle darkened again. The insects returned. The sounds of the night grew louder. But this time, she was not afraid. She had a plan. She would follow the stream. She would keep moving, and she would survive. The morning sun rose behind the trees. The jungle glowed with light. Mist hung low over the ground. Every leaf sparkled with water. Birds called to each other from high branches. Juliane opened her eyes. Her body was stiff. Her arms and legs were covered in insect bites. Her shoulder still ached. She sat up slowly and looked around. The stream shimmered nearby. She was alive. She remembered her plan. Follow the stream. Find a river. Follow the river to people. She took a deep breath and whispered that she would keep going. She had no map, no shoes, no food except a few pieces of candy. But she had hope, and she had her father's words. Juliane walked along the edge of the stream. The ground was slippery. Mud stuck to her feet. She moved carefully. She used a stick to balance herself. The trees were thick and heavy with vines. Leaves brushed her face. She could hear the buzz of insects. It was hot. The air felt heavy. Every breath smelled like soil and water hours. Past, she followed every curve of the stream. Sometimes the water disappeared into thick roots. Sometimes it widened into small pools. She drank from it often. She walked in silence. Her mind drifted between memories and fear. She remembered Christmas morning, the way her father would play music on an old radio, the smell of bread from the small kitchen, her mother laughing while wrapping gifts. Then she remembered the fire, the noise, the fall. She tried to push those images away, but they came back. Again and again. By midday the heat was unbearable. Her skin burned, her lips were dry. She looked up and saw patches of blue sky between the trees. She thought of airplanes. She wondered if someone was searching for her. She waved her arms and shouted. Her voice echoed and vanished. No answer. Only the endless hum of the jungle. She stopped to rest near a large fallen tree. She ate another piece of candy. The sweetness gave her strength. She drank from the stream again. She stared at her reflection in the water. Her face looked different. Bruised, dirty, older. She whispered that she could do this. She had to do this. As she walked farther, she noticed the jungle changing. The ground became softer, the trees taller, the air cooler. She saw butterflies. She saw a monkey swing from a branch and disappear. For a moment she smiled. Even in her fear, the beauty of the jungle amazed her. But then she saw something that froze her. A small piece of metal hung from a branch above the stream. It looked familiar. She moved closer. It was part of the airplane. A piece of the fuselage. It was burned and bent. The sight made her heart race. If wreckage was here, then maybe others were nearby. She called out again. Her voice broke. Nothing answered. She kept walking. Every few meters, she found more debris. A torn piece of seat fabric, a shoe, part of a broken window frame. She searched around each piece, hoping to find a person, but she found none. Only silence. Later she came to a clearing. Sunlight poured down, and the center lay 3 seats still attached together. One seat was upside down. The others were empty. There were no people. She felt her stomach twist. Her hands trembled. She knew what she might find, but she could not look away. She stepped closer behind. The seats she saw a shape lying in the grass, a body. She froze. Her throat closed. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. She forced herself forward. The face was hidden by leaves. She moved them gently. The body was of a woman. Juliane looked closer. It was not her mother. Relief and grief hit her at the same time. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered a prayer. Then she stepped back. She could not stay there. She walked away from the clearing. Her body felt weak. Her legs were shaking. She followed. The stream again. The sound of running water gave her comfort. She focused on each step. One after another, her father's voice echoed in her mind. Follow the water, it always leads to people. As the day passed, the jungle grew darker. Rain began to fall. Again, the air turned cold. She could not find shelter. She stood under a tree and let the rain wash her face. Her hair was soaked, her clothes stuck to her skin. She shivered. She wished her mother was beside her. She whispered that she missed her when. The rain stopped. She kept walking. She was afraid to stop for too long. The forest was too quiet. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps behind her. She would turn and see nothing. She told herself it was her imagination. She had to stay calm. She found another wrecked piece of metal. This one was big. It had numbers painted on it, the same numbers she had seen on the side of the plane before they took off. She touched the metal. It was cold. She whispered that she would survive for all of them. For the people who never woke up, for her mother, for herself. The sun began to set. Shadows stretched across the ground, the air filled with the sounds of crickets. She needed a place to rest. She found a spot near the stream under a wide tree. She cleared leaves and made a small bed of grass. Her body ached. Her stomach was empty. She had one piece of candy left. She decided not to eat it yet. Night came quickly. She lay down and stared at the dark sky through the trees. She could see stars flickering. Above. She thought of her father. He must be searching for her. She imagined him walking through the jungle calling her name. She promised she would not give up. She would follow the water until she found him. The jungle hummed with life around her. She closed her eyes and listened. The stream whispered beside her. The leaves rustled gently in the wind. For the first time since the crash, she felt a small sense of peace. She was still scared, still lost. But she had a direction. She had a plan. She whispered that she would survive. Then she fell asleep beneath the endless sky. The next morning came with heavy mist. The jungle looked gray and still. Every leaf dripped water. The stream beside her bed was calm and clear. Juliane woke with pain in her back. Her body was stiff from the cold ground. Her feet were swollen and covered in small cuts. She could barely stand, but she forced herself up. She whispered that she would keep moving. She drank from the stream. She washed her face. The water felt cool and alive. She ate the last piece of candy. It was sweet and small, but it gave her hope. She looked at the water and followed it again. Downstream. Always downstream. The forest was thicker now. The air smelled of wet earth and flowers. Every few steps she brushed spiders and leaves from her path. Mosquitoes swarmed around her face. Their bites burned and itched. She waved her hands, but they kept coming. She remembered her father telling her that mosquitoes carried sickness. She hoped she would not get sick. Hours passed. The stream curved between trees. Sometimes she walked in the water to cool her feet. The stones were slippery. She fell often, each fall left new bruises, but she kept going. Her mind focused on survival. She found a patch of fruit hanging from a low branch. They looked like small green berries. She reached for one but stopped. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Never eat what you do not know. The jungle is full of poison. She pulled her hand back. She would find something else. The sun climbed higher. Sweat soaked her clothes. Her stomach ached with hunger. Her throat burned from thirst. She drank from the stream again and again. Sometimes the water made her stomach hurt. but she had no choice. It was the only thing keeping her alive. By midday, the heat became unbearable. The air felt thick, her vision blurred. She walked slower. She stumbled more often. Her thoughts began to fade in and out. She saw shapes in the trees. At first, she thought they were animals. Then she realized they were her imagination. Her mind was playing tricks. She talked to herself to stay awake. She said her name out loud. She said her parents' names. She said she would survive. The sound of the jungle surrounded her. It was never quiet. Birds screamed from the canopy. Insects buzzed near her ears. Somewhere far away, something growled. She froze. The growl came again, low, deep. She stood perfectly still. Her heart pounded. Then the sound faded. She took a slow breath. She whispered that she had to stay calm. Fear would kill her faster than anything else. She kept walking. Her bare feet bled. She wrapped them with pieces of her torn dress. It helped a little. She moved slower but steadier. The ground began to slope downward. The sound of water grew louder. She smiled weakly. A bigger river that meant progress. When she reached it, she stood on the bank and stared. It was wide and fast. The current looked strong. The water sparkled under the sunlight. It was beautiful and dangerous. She knew she had to follow it, but not walk too close. One wrong step, and the current could take her. She followed the bank step by step, hour by hour. She saw fish darting in the shallows. She wished she could catch one. She looked for fruit again, but found none. Hunger made her dizzy. She stopped to rest near a large tree. The bark was rough and smelled of sap. She leaned against it and closed her eyes. She could hear her heartbeat, slow and heavy. She wondered if anyone was still looking for her. Maybe search teams were flying above right now. Maybe her father was with them. She looked up and saw a small patch of sky. No planes, just clouds drifting by. She whispered that she would not give up when evening came. The rain returned. This time it was heavier. Cold drops hit her skin like glass. Thunder rolled across the jungle. She found a tree with a hollow trunk and crawled inside. It was dark and cramped, but it kept her dry. She sat with her knees to her chest and listened to the storm. Lightning flashed outside. Each flash lit the forest for a second. Then it was dark again. She thought of her mother, the sound of her voice, the way she smiled, the way she held her hand during the flight. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered that she missed her. She whispered that she would find her when the storm finally ended. The jungle smelled fresh again. Steam rose from the ground. The sky turned orange with the setting sun. She crawled out of the hollow tree and looked around. Everything was quiet. She felt a strange calm. She was still alive. She had survived another day. She made a bed of leaves near the river. She looked at the stars through the trees. They looked close enough to touch. She whispered to them. She said she would keep walking tomorrow. She said she would not die here. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep to the sound of the river. The morning light woke her slowly. The sun was warm on her face. The river shimmered beside her. The jungle sounded alive again. Birds sang high above. Insects buzzed near her ears. The world was beautiful, but she felt broken. Juliane sat up. Her head spun. Her lips were cracked. Her feet were bleeding. Her shoulder was swollen and stiff. She could barely lift her arm. Every breath hurt, but she knew she could not stop. She whispered that she would walk. She whispered that she would live. She took a drink from the river. The water was cool and sweet. It gave her strength. She stood on shaky legs and began to move. The forest floor was uneven and full of roots. She stumbled often. Each fall sent pain through her body. But she always stood again. She could hear her father's voice in her head. He said that life in the jungle belonged to those who refused to stop. The day grew hotter. The sun burned her skin. Sweat stung her eyes. She walked along the bank of the river. Sometimes she walked through shallow water to cool her legs. Her reflection followed her in the ripples. She looked like a ghost, pale thin, covered in mud, but her eyes still held fire. She whispered that she would make it out. By midday she felt dizzy, her stomach cramped with hunger. Her hands trembled. She had nothing left to eat. She looked at the trees and tried to find fruit. Most were high above where she could not reach. She saw bright red berries hanging low. They looked tempting. But she remembered her father's warning. Red was danger. Red was poison. She turned away. As the heat grew, her mind began to blur. The air shimmered. The jungle seemed to bend and twist. She saw shapes in the shadows, a figure standing near the trees, a woman in a white dress. For a moment she thought it was her mother. She smiled and whispered her name. Then the figure vanished. It had never been real. Tears filled her eyes. She was alone again. She kept walking. Her body moved on instinct. Her thoughts drifted like smoke. She spoke to herself out loud. She told herself stories from her childhood. She talked about her dog. She described the books she used to read. Anything to stay awake. Anything to feel less alone. Hours passed. The river twisted through the jungle. The trees grew thicker, the ground darker. She began to see flashes of color around. Her blue, green, white. She thought they were birds. Then she realized they were spots in her vision. Her mind was slipping. She stopped to rest under a tree. Her heart pounded fast. She tried to count her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Each one felt like fire. In her chest, she looked at the sky. The sun looked strange. It seemed to spin slowly. The light hurt her eyes. She closed them. She thought she heard her mother's voice calling, soft, kind, familiar. She opened her eyes and whispered that she was coming, but there was no one there. She began to cry. Her tears mixed with the dirt on her face. She wanted to lie down and never move again, but she could not. Something deep inside her refused, a small spark that told her to keep going. She stood again. Her legs felt like wood. Her throat was dry. Her voice cracked. She whispered that she would survive. As she walked, she noticed a change in the air. It smelled different. Smoke, faint, but real. She stopped and listened. No sound. Then she saw something floating in the water. It looked like a piece of burned wood. She picked it up. It smelled of ash. That meant fire. That meant people. Her heart raced. She began to follow the river faster. Each step gave her new hope. If there was smoke, there must be life. Maybe a camp. Maybe a village. Maybe someone who could help. But as the day went on, the smell faded. The smoke disappeared. Her hope slipped away again. She slowed down. She felt her strength leaving her. She fell to her knees in the mud. She stayed there for a long time. She watched the river move beside her. She whispered that she could not go on. But then she looked at the water. It kept flowing. It never stopped. She smiled faintly. If the river could keep moving, then so could she. The light began to fade. The sky turned orange. She walked until she found a flat patch of ground beside the river. She gathered leaves and branches to make a bed. She lay down and looked at the sky through the canopy. Her body ached. Her heart felt heavy. She thought about her mother again. Her voice, her hands, her laughter. She whispered that she hoped her mother had survived somewhere out there. Then she closed her eyes. She drifted between sleep and dreams. In her dreams she was home. The air smelled like rain. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Her father was reading a book. Her mother was smiling. There was no fear, no pain, just peace. Then she woke suddenly. The jungle was dark again. The dream was gone. She felt the cold ground under her. She listened to the sound of the river. It reminded her she was still alive. She whispered that tomorrow she would find someone, she would find help, she would not die here. The morning came without color. The sky was pale and the air was heavy. Mist rolled above the river. Like breath, Juliane opened her eyes and stared at the moving water. Her body refused to rise. Every muscle ached. Her legs felt like stone. Her head throbbed with pain. She lay still for a long time. She listened to the rhythm of the river. It sounded like a voice whispering to her, "Keep moving. Keep breathing." She turned slowly and sat up. Her back hurt. Her hands were swollen. Her nails were broken. Her skin was scratched and bruised. She could see the bones of her feet through torn flesh. The sight made her dizzy. She whispered that she could not stop now. Not after everything. Not after surviving the sky. She drank from the river again. The water tasted like metal. It burned her throat. But she swallowed anyway. It was the only thing she had. Juliane splashed her face and wiped the dirt from her eyes. She could barely recognize herself. She looked like a shadow, but she was still alive. She began to walk again. The air felt thick and wet. The jungle around her looked darker. The trees leaned over. The river, as if watching her. The sound of insects never stopped. Their voices filled the air like static. Her world was noise and green. She could no longer tell how many days had passed. Time had no meaning now. She followed the river downstream. Steps were slow. She leaned on a branch for balance. The ground was slick with mud. Each step left blood behind her. Sometimes she slipped and fell. She would lie there for a while, staring at the leaves above. She would think about her parents, her mother's soft voice, her father's calm smile. She would remember sitting with them on the porch back home, the sound of birds in the morning, the smell of coffee. Then the pain would return, and she would rise again around midday. The river widened. The current grew stronger. Juliane walked near the edge and looked into the water. She saw something floating far ahead. At first she thought it was wood. Then she saw hair, long and dark. Her heart stopped. She moved closer slowly. It was a body. Juliane was a woman. The face was turned away. Juliane's hands shook. She whispered her mother's name. She stepped into the water and turned the body. The current pulled at her legs. The face was swollen and pale. It was not her mother. It was someone else. She stepped. Back tears filled her eyes. She whispered that she was sorry. Then she turned away. She walked for hours after that. She could not stop thinking about the woman in the river. She wondered how many others were still out there. How many had fallen from the sky and disappeared into the jungle. She whispered that she would live for all of them, that she would tell their story. Her voice was barely a whisper now. The sky darkened again. The air grew colder. Rain began to fall. At first it was light. Then it became heavy. It fell in sheets and drenched everything. Juliane walked through it without stopping. The rain washed the blood from her legs. It cooled her burning skin. It felt like the jungle itself was trying to keep her alive. As night approached, she searched for shelter. She found a tree with thick roots forming a hollow space beneath it. She crawled inside. The air smelled like moss and rot, but it was dry. She lay down and curled into a ball. Her stomach growled. Her hands trembled. She whispered that she would not sleep too long. She needed to move when the rain stopped. She did not dream that night. Her mind was empty, only darkness, only sound. When she woke again, it was still raining. Her body was shaking, her lips were blue, her fingers were numb. She forced herself out of the hollow and into the rain. She walked again. Every step was pain, every breath was fire. At one point she slipped and fell into the river. The current caught her instantly. She tried to grab a branch, but it broke. Water spun her around. She gasped for air, but swallowed water instead. She kicked and fought. The current pulled her under again and again. Her mind screamed, her arms thrashed. Finally, her hand caught a root near the bank. She pulled herself out and lay on the mud gasping. Her chest burned, her throat hurt, but she was alive. Again, she lay there staring at the sky. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. She could see a faint blue above the trees. She whispered that the river would not take her, not yet. Not before she found someone. When her strength returned, she began walking again. Her steps were slower now, her body weaker, but her mind was sharper. She had only one goal left: find people, find help. She followed the river through valleys and bends. Sometimes she saw birds diving into the water. Sometimes she saw the flash of fish. Once she saw a caiman lying still near the shore. Its eyes were open. Watching her, she froze. The creature did not move. After a long moment, she stepped back, slowly. She walked away without a sound. Her heart pounded. The jungle tested her every hour. Thorns cut her legs. Insects crawled into her wounds. The heat made her dizzy, but she refused to stop. She whispered that she was almost there. She did not know where there was, but she believed it existed. It had to. When night fell again, she found a dry patch of ground near a rock wall. She sat against it and stared at the water. The moonlight danced on the surface. She felt her eyelids grow heavy. She whispered that tomorrow she would find someone. Then she closed her eyes. The river moved beside her like a heartbeat, constant, alive, unstoppable. Morning arrived with silence. No birds, no wind, only the soft whisper of the river. Juliane opened her eyes. Her body felt numb. Her lips were cracked, her tongue was dry, her skin was pale and burning with insect bites. Every wound throbbed, every movement sent pain through her bones. She had lost track of time. Days and nights had become one endless moment. But she was still alive. She sat up slowly. The jungle around her was damp and quiet. Mist rolled across the river. The air smelled of wet leaves and decay. Her stomach cramped. She had eaten nothing for days. Her mind drifted between thoughts and dreams. She whispered her mother's name. She whispered that she was coming. She drank from the river again. It hurt her throat, but gave her strength. She washed her face with trembling hands. She looked at her reflection in the water. Her eyes looked hollow, her hair tangled, her face unrecognizable. She stared for a long time and whispered that she would keep going. She stood and began to walk. The jungle was quiet that morning. Even the insects seemed tired. Juliane followed the river as it curved around. Thick roots and fallen trees, her bare feet sank into the mud. The smell of rot filled the air. Every few steps she had to stop and rest. Her legs felt like wood. Her back hurt. Her vision blurred. Sometimes she saw flashes of light in the corners of her eyes. Sometimes she heard voices. A man calling her name, her mother laughing. She would turn and see nothing. Only the river. Only the trees. The heat grew as the day went on. The sun burned through the mist. The air felt heavy. Her dress was soaked with sweat and rain. She walked slower now. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Each step took all her strength. She whispered that she would find help. She whispered that she would not die here. Hours passed. Then she saw something strange. A line across the ground. It looked unnatural. Straight, smooth. She knelt and touched it. It was a path. A trail made by people. Her heart jumped. Her hands shook. She stood quickly and looked around. The trail disappeared into the forest ahead. She followed it. Each step filled her with new energy. Every sound made her listen harder. She thought she heard voices again. Maybe real this time. The path led her through tall trees. The sunlight broke through in thin beams. She walked faster. Her breath quickened. Then she saw it. A small shape in the distance. Wood, a roof, a hut. Her eyes filled with tears. It was real. Someone lived there. She began to run. Her legs wobbled. She stumbled and fell. She crawled the last few feet. She reached the hut and called out. Her voice cracked. No answer. She pushed the door open. Inside it was dark and empty. There was a small bed made of wood. A cold fire pit. Old tools on the wall. No people. But it was shelter. She stepped inside and sat on the floor. The smell of smoke was still fresh. Someone had been there recently, she whispered. Thank you. Then she lay down and cried. For the first time since the crash, she felt safe. The roof above her kept the rain away. The floor was dry. She closed her eyes. Her body trembled. Her breathing slowed. Sleep came like a wave. When she woke, the light was dim. She did not know how long she had slept. Her body felt lighter, weaker, but her mind was clearer. She looked around the hut again. On the wall hung a tin can. Next to it was a small pot. She crawled toward them. She looked inside. There was dried food. It looked old but edible. She took a small piece and chewed slowly. Her mouth watered. Her body reacted with shock. It felt like life returning. Then she heard a sound outside. Footsteps. She froze. She held her breath. The footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming. She crawled toward the door. She looked through a crack in the wood. 3 men appeared near the trees. They carried tools and rifles. Their clothes were dirty. Hunters or lumber workers. Her heart raced. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She shouted. Her voice was weak and broken. The men stopped. They looked around. She shouted again. One of them turned and saw her. He ran toward the hut. She began to cry. He knelt beside her. He spoke, but she could not understand the words. She only heard the tone. Kind, surprised, alive. Another man entered and gave her water. She drank. She coughed. She whispered that she had survived the crash. They stared at her in disbelief. One of them covered his mouth. They helped her sit up. She tried to speak again, but her voice faded. Tears ran down her face. The men spoke quickly to each other. Then they lifted her gently. They said they would take her to safety. They said she would. Juliane closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she let herself believe it. She was going home. The jungle had not taken her. The river had led her to life. She whispered thank you. Then she let the darkness take her again. This time, it was not fear. It was peace. The next time Juliane opened her eyes, she was lying on a wooden floor. The roof above her was made of palm leaves. A faint light shone through the cracks. The air smelled of smoke and wood. Voices whispered nearby. Men spoke softly. In Spanish, she could hear water boiling. The sound felt distant and comforting. She was safe. She was alive. A man knelt beside her. He handed her a bowl of soup. Her hands trembled as she took it. The warmth filled her body. She had forgotten what real food tasted like. She sipped slowly. The men watched in silence. One of them crossed himself. He said she was a miracle. She did not understand everything they said, but she understood the tone. They were kind. They were amazed. After she ate, the men helped her sit up. Her body felt weak, but lighter. They washed her wounds with clean water. The sting made her cry out. But she thanked them. They wrapped her legs with bandages made from cloth. They spoke softly to calm her. They said a boat would come tomorrow. They would take her down the river to a town. There she could find doctors. There she could call her father. That night, she lay near the fire. The sound of rain outside mixed with the crackle of flames. She watched sparks rise into the dark. Her mind drifted. She remembered the faces of those she had seen in the jungle, the passengers, the silence, the river. She closed her eyes and whispered their names. She promised she would never forget them. She promised she would tell the world what had happened when morning came. The men helped her to the riverbank. A small wooden boat waited there. They laid blankets across the bottom. She sat down and looked around one last time. The jungle stretched endlessly behind her. It had been her prison, her test, her savior. She whispered, "Goodbye." Then the engine started. The boat moved forward. The current carried them downstream. The wind brushed her face. The air smelled different, cleaner, softer. For the first time she could see open sky. It looked endless. She stared at it for a long time. The men talked quietly as the boat moved. They pointed to the trees and told stories. She listened and smiled faintly. She was too tired to speak, but she felt peace. The river that once felt like death now felt like life. After hours of travel, they reached a small settlement. Children ran to the shore. Dogs barked. People gathered. They stared at the pale girl in the boat. They whispered that she was the survivor, the one who fell from the sky. The men explained everything. The villagers listened. In silence, some crossed themselves. Others cried. They carried her to a small hut near the river inside. A woman brought her warm tea. A man sent word by radio to the nearest city. He said they had found a survivor from Flight 508. The message traveled fast. By nightfall, people hundreds of miles away were already talking about it. A girl had fallen from the sky and lived a miracle in the jungle. The next morning, a small plane landed near the village. 2 men in uniforms stepped out. They spoke to the villagers. They brought medicine and food. They helped Juliane onto the plane. Her hands shook as she climbed inside. The seats were soft. The smell of metal and fuel filled the air. It reminded her of that night. For a moment she froze. Her breath caught. Then one of the rescuers placed a hand on her shoulder. He said she was safe. Now, she nodded slowly. The engine started. The plane lifted off. She closed her eyes. She held onto the seat. The air pressed against her face. The world below grew smaller. She whispered that she was not afraid. Hours later they landed in the city. Doctors rushed to help her. They carried her to an ambulance. People lined the runway to see her. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Someone said she was the only survivor. Juliane did not answer. She was too tired to speak. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered her mother's name. At the hospital, doctors cleaned her wounds. They gave her food and medicine. They told her she would recover. They asked her how she survived. She told them she followed the river. She drank from it. She walked for days. She believed it would lead her to people. They looked at her in disbelief. They said no one had ever survived such a fall. She said she had no choice. She wanted to live. She wanted to see her father again. When her father arrived at the hospital, he ran into her room. He saw her sitting on the bed. He froze. Tears filled his eyes. He held her and began to cry. She cried too. They stayed like that for a long time. No words, only tears. He whispered that she was the bravest person he had ever known. She whispered that she had followed his voice in her head. He smiled through his tears. News spread across the world. Headlines called her the girl who fell from the sky. Reporters from America, Europe, everywhere. They all wanted to know her story, how she survived the impossible, how she walked alone through the jungle for 10 days, how she fought hunger and fear. Juliane told them the truth. She said she did not think about miracles. She only thought about her parents. She said she followed the river because it was alive, and as long as it moved, she would too. Her story became legend. Scientists studied how she survived. Pilots spoke of her courage. The families of the lost found comfort in her words. She had carried a small part of every soul from that flight through the jungle with her. She had brought their story back to the world. That night, Juliane looked out of the hospital window. The city lights glowed below her. The sound of life returned. Cars, voices, laughter. But in her heart, she could still hear the jungle, the river, the rain. She whispered that she would never forget it. She whispered that it had given her life. Years passed. The world changed. But Juliane never forgot the jungle. She dreamed of it often. The sound of rain, the smell of wet soil, the endless whisper of the river. It never left her. It lived in her memory like a heartbeat. She studied biology, just like her father. She spent years learning about the rainforest, about the creatures that lived there, about the delicate balance of life hidden beneath the canopy. But no matter how much she learned, she knew one truth. The jungle had saved her, and it had taken everyone else. One day she decided to go back. It had been more than 20 years since the crash. The world had called it a miracle, but she called it unfinished. She needed to see it again. She needed to face what she had left behind. She flew over the same mountains, the same rivers, the same deep green that had once been her prison. The flight was quiet. The clouds below looked soft, peaceful, but she knew what hid beneath them. She looked out the window and whispered that she was coming back when the plane landed. She met the rescue team that would guide her. They carried maps and tools. They were young and strong. They knew the forest, but none of them had lived what she had lived. She looked at them and said that the jungle would test them all. They nodded. Then they began the journey. The forest looked the same as she remembered: tall trees, thick vines, the sound of insects everywhere. Each step felt like walking through time. The air was heavy with humidity. The ground was soft. Her boots sank into the mudbirds cried from high branches. It was alive in every direction. They followed the same river she had once followed, the same river that had guided her to life. It shimmered in the sunlight. She watched it and smiled. She whispered, "Thank you," as they moved deeper. The sounds of the modern world disappeared. No cars, no voices, only the heartbeat of the jungle. Her guide pointed ahead. He said the crash site was near. Her chest tightened. Her breath slowed. She could feel her pulse in her ears. She walked carefully. Every sound felt sacred. Then she saw it. A piece of metal half buried in the earth, green with moss. The curve of a wing, the letters barely visible. Lanza 508. Her legs weakened. She knelt beside it. Her hand touched the cold metal. It felt like touching a ghost. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered that she was sorry. She whispered that she was still here. The rescue team stood behind her in silence. They looked at the wreckage scattered across the ground, pieces of seats, twisted steel, nature had taken. Most of it back vines grew through the holes. Flowers bloomed where there had once been fire. Life had returned. Juliane walked slowly among the debris. Her hands brushed against fragments of metal and cloth. Each step brought memories. The shaking. Plain the flash of light. Her mother's voice. The wind. The silence. She closed her eyes. She could still feel it all. She stopped at a small clearing. Her guide said this was where most of the wreckage had fallen. She looked at the ground and knelt. She whispered a prayer. She said the names of those she remembered. She said her mother's name last. Her voice broke. The jungle was quiet. The leaves moved gently in the wind. It felt as if the forest was listening. She placed a small white flower. On the ground, it was simple, pure. She whispered that she had kept her promise. She had told their story. The world knew their names. They were not forgotten as the sun began to set. The light turned golden. It filtered through the trees and painted the wreckage in soft color. Juliane stood and looked around one last time. The jungle looked peaceful now, not cruel, not dark, peaceful. She whispered that it had taught her what life meant, that survival was not luck. It was will. It was love. The guide called to her. It was time to leave. She nodded and turned toward the river. It moved quietly beside them, the same river that had once carried her to life. She watched it flow and smiled. She whispered, "Thank you again." Then she walked away from the sight. The sound of water followed her until it faded into the trees. When she returned to the city, reporters asked her what it felt like. She said the jungle was no longer her nightmare. It was her teacher. She said she had faced death and learned how precious life was. She said she no longer feared the dark. She said she still dreamed of the rain that night. She sat by the window of her hotel. She watched the city lights flicker. She thought of her mother. She thought of the people who never came home. She whispered that they were still with her. In every drop of rain, in every sound of the river, in every breath she took. Years passed and the world continued to change. New planes filled the skies, new people told old stories. But the story of Juliane never faded. It was spoken in classrooms, it was written in books, it was told on television. The girl who fell from the sky. The girl who lived. Juliane became a scientist. She studied the same forests that had tested her. She walked the same trails where she once crawled for life. Each tree she touched felt like an old friend. Each river she crossed reminded her of her journey. She never forgot what the jungle had shown her. It had been her greatest fear and her greatest teacher. She never searched for fame. She never wanted to be called a miracle. She said she had simply done what she had to do. She said, survival was not about strength. It was about will. About believing that life was worth fighting for. She spoke quietly when people asked about that night. She said she remembered the lightning, the noise, the fire, and then the silence. She said she still felt her mother's presence when it rained. Reporters often asked if she still feared flying. She said no. She said the sky had given her a second chance, and she had made peace with it. Each flight reminded her of how fragile life could be. Each landing reminded her of how beautiful it was to still be alive. She built her life around nature. She dedicated herself to studying the rainforest. She worked to protect the wildlife her parents had loved. She told students that the jungle was not cruel and was honest. It gave life, and it took life. She said she was alive because she had listened to it, because she had followed the river when she spoke at universities. Her voice was calm. She did not dramatize her story. She did not speak like a hero. She spoke like someone who had seen both death and grace. She said survival was not about miracles. It was about moments, one choice after another, one step after another, until you find light again. People often cried when they heard her story. They said she gave them hope. She always smiled softly and said the jungle had done that. Not her in later years. She returned to Peru many times. Each visit felt different. The jungle no longer frightened her. It welcomed her. The sounds of birds, the rush of the river, the scent of wet leaves, all of it felt like home. She said she could still hear the echo of that day, not as pain, but as gratitude. Her father passed away many years later. She buried him near the forest he had loved. She said she felt peace knowing he was close to the place that had saved her when she stood by his grave. Rain began to fall. She closed her eyes and whispered that he had been right. The jungle was both life and death. And she had walked through both as she grew older. She avoided the spotlight. She preferred the quiet. She lived surrounded by trees and books. Sometimes she would walk by a river and stop to listen. The sound was the same, gentle, endless. She would smile and whisper thank you. She never called herself lucky. She said luck was random. She said she had faith in the small things. The sound of water. The strength of the human heart. The voice that tells you to take one more step. When people asked what she had learned from her survival, she always gave the same answer. She said life is fragile. It can break in an instant. But the will to live is stronger than anything. She said the jungle had taught her to listen, to be patient, to keep moving forward, even when everything hurts. She said the river had led her not just to rescue, but to understanding. The world still remembers her documentaries, retell her story. Writers describe her courage. Students study her survival in classrooms. She has become more than a survivor. She has become a symbol of resilience, of hope, of the quiet strength that lives inside us all. Sometimes she looks at the sky and remembers the night of the crash, the lightning, the storm, the moment everything broke apart. Then she looks at the world around her, the forests, the rivers, the people she loves, and she smiles. Because she knows she lived to tell the story, because she knows the jungle let her go. The river still flows through the forest, the trees still whisper in the wind. And somewhere, deep inside, the girl who fell from the sky still walks beside it, alive, eternal, free.